Hello, my friends. I am Katie Taylor, and I'm so happy that you're joining us. I am a certified child life specialist, and we bring you real stories from real parents in the world of pediatric healthcare. Today, we're diving into a topic that many parents enter parenthood thinking, who knew this could be that hard? When we think about raising our children, feeding seems like a natural and straightforward part of parenting. We envision happy moments around the dining table or introducing our little ones to new tastes and textures. But for some families, the journey of feeding is far from simple. It can be filled with unexpected hurdles, anxiety, and a search for answers. Our guests today, Jaclyn Pederson and Athena Flicek, are no strangers to these struggles. Jaclyn is a wife and a mom of two energetic boys, and she is the CEO of Feeding Matters, a national nonprofit dedicated to supporting children with pediatric feeding disorders. Her personal experiences with feeding have profoundly impacted her professional life. Before having her own children, Jaclyn worked at Feeding Matters, gaining insights into the complexities of pediatric feeding disorders. However, it wasn't until she faced challenges with her own son that she truly understood the importance of advocacy and the need for comprehensive resources. And joining Jaclyn is Athena. She is the mother of a 5-year-old boy, and she brings a unique perspective as a parent who has navigated the feeding journey. Athena's story very much underscores the importance of finding the right support and the right resources, and how those things can transform a family's experiences. In today's episode, both Jaclyn and Athena share their journeys about being professionals, but also being parents who seek help for their kids. So please join us as we explore the unexpected challenges of feeding and learn from the unique perspectives of Jaclyn and Athena. Whether you're a parent facing similar issues or you're just simply interested in learning more about pediatric feeding, please stay tuned to this episode.
My name is Jaclyn Pederson. I am a wife and a mom. My 4-year-old son is named Charlie, and my 1.5-year-old is named George. They keep us very active and busy and have honestly taught us a lot and taught us a lot about my professional world as well. So I'm CEO of Feeding Matters. We are a national nonprofit for children with pediatric feeding disorder. We work with both parents and professionals. And working at Feeding Matters before I had children was a really interesting lesson for me, in the fact that I had Charlie at 4 and he was typically developing in his feeding journey. And it just showed me how much parents don't get the information that they need around feeding, even from the very start. We have conflicting information from social media versus our pediatricians. And then having George a year and a half ago, he struggled very early on with feeding. And so had to really lean into kind of being an advocate for him and lean on all of the resources that we had at Feeding Matters to support him in his feeding journey. And we're still working through some of his GI stuff right now at a year and a half, but he's got a good relationship with food at this point in time. And I hope that continues.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, especially both worlds. It's amazing when you need a resource and you can actually find it and it's supportive. It can be a game changer.
It really can. And I think for me, you kind of felt like, oh, I've been with this organization, I should know everything. And it makes you realize how much we really need to lean on healthcare professionals to help identify these things. And it can't always be
Yeah.
moms or parents or caregivers in the throes of it,
Yeah.
identifying and finding the right resources.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And yes, Athena, tell us a little bit about you.
My name is Athena Flicek. I am the mom of a 5-year-old boy, just one, only one, my one and only, but it feels like I have 3 children. I'm a retired elementary school teacher, and I actually found Feeding Matters as a parent struggling with feed my child. Like, lots of tears came before I found their website. It was the only resource that was offered to me by a pediatrician like 5 years ago. So of course I clung to it, right? Like a life source. And now I am combining my passions of my newfound passion of pediatric feeding disorder with my still, of course, I always thought I was going to be a teacher forever, with my education passion. And I plan the annual pediatric feeding disorder conference at Feeding Matters. So I was lucky to have those both come together.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how back when you're thinking about what your career will be, you never imagine that you will
No.
blend some of the things, but I think it's the key to being successful is having things that fill you personally and professionally, and if you can find that, it's like the sweet spot.
I agree. I agree.
Well, Athena, I know you're going to talk with us a little bit kind of about your family's feeding journey.
Mm.
Walk us through kind of the beginning and finding out that something was going on with your son or what challenges he had.
Mm-hmm. Ari was born pretty much on time, but he didn't feed from the beginning. Like he wouldn't latch and he didn't eat. And he came out so fast that he was constantly choking on his amniotic fluid. Like the things you learn afterwards is like, oh, the pushing helps like get things out of their body. Like I had no idea. And it was my first one. But yeah, so he was like, so that kind of to me is like a theme throughout his whole life of kind of choking and not being able to eat. I felt something was wrong before we left, but they're like, oh, he finally went to the bathroom. You can go now. And I was like, I can go now. Go into what? Like all new parents, go into the unknown. But at home, he just basically started projectile vomiting like across the room after like every meal, every feed. It started when he was on liquids, but then also it got way worse when it was on solids, just now that I know due to his allergies. But at 18 months, so I'm 18 months with like just trauma and like not much support until I realized I couldn't do it anymore. Like I'm like, something is wrong. I need to advocate more. When you're in that space, it's hard to advocate for yourself. And everyone thinks that feeding is just like a reflex. Like, oh, anyone can eat.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just happens naturally, right? It does not.
No.
It does not happen naturally. And no one in my family had ever struggled with feeding before. So like all my support networks, like no one had talked about feeding struggles. I had like nothing. I had no one else's experience or support to kind of guide me through. But we went to get an evaluation, a comprehensive one that I paid out of pocket for because I'm like, well, something's happening. This is not covered, but I need to know what's going on. And they're like, you need to go to GI, an allergist, like a feeding therapist, and just all the things and figure out what's going on. So we did learn at 18 months, we had his first endoscopy to learn he has EOE, which stands for eosinophilic esophagitis. It just means that if an allergen enters the esophagus, all the little cells rush to it like an irritation, and basically his food will get compacted right here. And then it has to, for Ari, it would come out. He would vomit. And then, of course, that goes along with the pediatric feeding disorder because he had a lot of other issues. He only chewed on one side. He didn't use his tongue to move the food around his mouth. He was afraid of food. He wouldn't even sit in his chair, which is not normal. He never showed me hunger cues. He wasn't hungry until he was 2 years old. So that was, I thought people were like, oh, I'm hungry, Mom. Like I heard that when he was 2. And I, of course, started crying immediately after he said that for the first time. And he also has sensory processing disorder, which makes it even more like interesting. I was talking to someone the other day and I was saying how I feel like I'm in charge of a science experiment that I have no training for. Like, that's what I feel like. This is a science experiment and a science project that I have no training for whatsoever. It's like you're trying things out to see what works. But now that he's going to go into kindergarten, it's more like turned into kind of like he's on an IEP. So like that is transitioning through, but he's doing better. But there's still some texture issues. And now it's turning more into like the psychosocial domain of a feeding disorder, which his anxiety is kind of taking over. So that's interesting to find out. I'm trying to be just his guide in this. Like it's hard to just want to like do everything for them. So I'm trying to guide him through his journey and not take on all those things that come with that. But those are his things. He has EOE, pediatric feeding disorder, sensory processing disorder. Those are his medical diagnoses. When he was born, he's still on his chart is failure to thrive and malnutrition, which is, as a parent, you don't want to have that on there. Because of course, what happens to parents whose kids are malnourished? They can get in trouble, you know? So like that to me is like the worst thing. Like, oh my gosh, am I going to be in trouble? My kid is malnourished. Like, what do I do? Yeah. That's just a little background. That's probably too much, but there it is.
No, not at all. I have so many questions. I have so many questions and just want to thank you for being so transparent about that because I think it's helpful, especially those who are listening and maybe identifying with if you have this one thing, well, maybe it's something else too. Or I never thought to ask that question. And maybe Athena and Jaclyn, y'all can both answer this question. But part of having a child who's in the medical environment a lot is learning how to find your voice as their fierce advocate. And it's not always something that comes naturally because we grew up thinking like the doctors are the end all be all and what they've told us is everything that exists, but they're also humans who have time limits and a million things to do. And so sometimes we have to do way more as parents than we ever expected to. And what has that journey been like, I guess, for both of you in finding your voice?
Well, I can go first, I guess, Athena. I think in learning about what healthcare professionals undergo and their experience and how they develop themselves as professionals really helped me see them in a different light before I had to jump into that role as being a parent advocate. Um, in a way, it allowed me to question, but then it also built a little bit of empathy for understanding, what they're going through. I already knew before I had George that my pediatrician was managing a full caseload and only had 15 minutes and didn't have the necessary background education on feeding or the necessary tools that would help support her asking the right questions about feeding. And so in that sense, I knew that at least I had a little bit more exposure to those things. So I felt like I could ask some clarifying questions. But then in other instances, you feel like you fall into this power trap of you're the doctor or the physician or the healthcare professional, and I just need to listen to you and write and take my notes. And you kind of forget that you're the expert sometime, or that you are the person that is living and breathing this day in and day out. And so it was this constant back and forth of feeling empowered and then falling into more of a negative self-talk, and then empowering myself to know that I can ask these questions. And I think that's a constant struggle that I think a lot of women specifically relate to, because I think it also falls into some of that imposter syndrome that we all tend to face in life. But for me, it was always having a game plan before going into an appointment of what I was going to ask. But I actually just got surprised at an appointment because I did think George's feeding was going really well. And so I didn't think it was going to be a question. And then we're in the appointment and he didn't gain weight. And she was like, "Oh, but what do you do for work again?" I was like, "Oh, I know a lot about feeding."
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
Yeah, so it just kind of like surprised me. And then so then I think when you are surprised, you don't ask the right questions. But luckily I was able to kind of like breathe through it and, talk to her a little bit more about like, okay, is constipation, is that showing some false weight that is affecting this curve that you're looking at that you think he's dropped off of? And so it's a balance, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to prepare and be as equipped as possible. But I mean, being able to practice breathing in a moment where you're feeling, she's not attacking, like that's not what it was, but that's like the response that your body can give is that like, oh, what did I do? What did I not do? What did I miss? What are you missing? It's really, really hard.
Yeah, you can rationally say it's not a threat for those questions to be asked. But I think even down to our nervous system, we feel it as a threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Athena, do you have any experiences or like a thing that comes to mind?
I had a different experience. My mom is a nurse and my sister is like a dermatologist, and everyone on that side of the family are doctors. So I just was like, they're pretty much like know-it-alls, and I love them. But that's what I felt like. I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm listening to all the doctors. Like they know, like I didn't know you had to have special classes or train in a feeding disorder. I just thought that you had a general array of information that you would, help your patients with. So for me going in there, I was just like, first of all, I was a ball. I literally did not go into any appointments without crying. And it doesn't matter how prepared I was. I had my little note card. I had Ari's dad there. And I was like, if I start crying, you know what to do. Like, here's the card. And it wouldn't matter. I would just start crying in that. And I couldn't breathe. I talked about like not being able to breathe until I started therapy for myself when I turned 40 a year and a half ago. And I think that's when the first was, I'm like, you need to breathe here. Like you're not breathing deeply enough, which gets you in a whole different hyper state. So I definitely just trusted that they knew what they were doing and they had all the right answers. And I didn't feel empowered in myself. I felt so like just shut down over the experience that I had. And I felt like a failure as a parent. So that when you feel like a failure, it's hard for you to talk and be confident. And that requires it requires you to be brave to ask those questions if you're in that space, in that headspace and moment. So I was not a good advocate for him until I think he was about 4 years. It took me 4 years to properly advocate and ask questions. And I still get choked up when I go in there. And I tell myself, just breathe through it, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I write it down, but I still forget things because it's like super intimidating. I have a multidisciplinary team for RE now. So it's like 5 doctors coming into the room at once with you, and it's you and your child. And I'm just like overwhelmed, but I'm trying to be in the moment and talk about what's going on with this little guy.
Yeah.
I don't want to waste their time. They have little time. I don't want to waste their time. I'm like anxious about wasting their time. So it's just a whole battle in there. But there are things you can do, but it's tough.
It's so tough. And I appreciate you acknowledging that. It is, you can be as prepared as possible, done it 20 times, and it can still, because there's so much on the line too. And that you don't know the next time you'll see them or be able to get your answers. And it can feel really overwhelming. Thank goodness there are just some incredible organizations like Feeding Matters to support families, parents, professionals as they go through these feeding journeys. I'd love to hear maybe some of the big things that Feeding Matters does to support families and how you're able to help them navigate these experiences.
Yeah, supporting families is actually at the heart of our organization. We often describe our organization as an education and advocacy organization for pediatric feeding disorder, supporting families and also educating healthcare professionals. But honestly, as an organization that's over 15 years old, we, from the get-go, knew how important peer-to-peer mentorship and support for families was, and how important supporting families throughout this journey together was. It takes all of us, up to 7 years to learn how to eat. And if there's any disruption in that process, it can be even longer. And so when you're facing such a long journey and you don't know what it needs to change or how it will change, you need someone else there beside you to be a listening ear, to walk you through it. So many of our families have heard from well-meaning family members that they'll eat when they're hungry, or have you tried chocolate? Maybe they just need to try some chocolate to eat, or grandparents saying, well, just leave them with me for the weekend and I'll get them to eat. And
Right.
there's this surrounding myth around feeding that kids will eat because they'll eat when they're hungry, or they're just in picky phases. And for children with pediatric feeding disorder, it's just not the case. And oftentimes it further traumatizes them and has a greater psychosocial impact that you have to unravel year over year over year. And so our organization really works to be there as a partner with families as they try to navigate this really complex system. The system is not built well to identify pediatric feeding disorder or to even have the right access to providers or resources or specialists or tests to work through it. And so our organization offers not only peer coaching, so a family member can call our organization and talk with another family member who may be facing something similar, or like a common question is, a lot of families struggle with, do they put in a feeding tube or not?
Right.
And so they can call and talk to someone about that who also faced a similar decision. And then we also not only have that, but we have a financial assistance program because it is very expensive. And so we do have scholarships for families, as well as many different resources and access to providers on our website, just to try to give as much education as we can, because it's a newer field. Pediatric feeding disorders diagnosis has only been around for 3 years now.
Wow. That's incredible. And Athena, I know you help run some of these programs.
I run our yearly conference, which is like our biggest event. So we have a great committee that puts together. Our committee is all volunteers. I want to put that out there. We can't do things without volunteers, but they help plan just a great, well-rounded educational curriculum content it's for everyone. It's for parents and professionals. Some of them can get kind of sciencey, but like I'm pretty nerdy. So and I think as a parent, anything, like you're not going to get everything that comes at you, but any little thing that you can use to relate to what you're going through is just super helpful. And of course, as a teacher, I just believe that knowledge helps you and is so powerful. So we have those sessions. And also what I like about this organization is that there's like people need different levels of support at different times. Because like for me, it took me a long time just to go to a website. Like it really did. I had to get up the courage just to go to a website. And thinking about talking to someone, I was like, no, in no way prepared, until I was like 2 years later. Then I was like, I'm ready to talk to someone about this, you know. And everyone goes through like their different continuum of what they can share at what time, but knowing that there's someone there that you can talk to is super helpful, which I think is amazing, peer-to-peer information. And just reading articles, like I just did a talk with one of our doctors was on our board, and she just gave me like about economic impact of like the healthcare burden of like people that have kids that have feeding disorder. And I was like morbidly curious to like see how much like we had spent on Ari out of pocket since he was born. And this of course takes into mind like me, I quit my job as a teacher because I had to take him to so many therapies that I couldn't, like, how do I take a kid to therapies and get subs? And I just was like, I don't even know how this works for people. But I did like all the numbers, and like on the low end, we've spent $250,000 on Ari so far on him out of pocket.
Oh my gosh.
And like that's not that alone. And like all the money we spent on like just like formula or shakes. Like we used to spend $400 a month just on his formula. You know, like think about that. I mean, and like what income? It's like, I don't know how people do it. And luckily his dad has a great job. So like, I mean, but it was still a lot of tension in the home about finances, which is also something that when you have a kid that has a medically complex thing, those finances are up there, those bills are coming in, and that does not make for a happy home. It's super stressful, super stressful.
So many different things that are working against you, it seems in some way. And then you have this kind of light, like an organization like Feeding Matters, where you just hear another parent say, like, that's happening in our home too. Like, it's not just you. You're not doing anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong to cause this happen. Like, this is just what we're experiencing too. It, like, immediately can help with some of that self-talk that's just not helpful in your head. I love to ask this question, and that's if you had, and for you guys, it would be like a magic wand for Feeding Matters. What would it be, and what would you try to accomplish?
I think you should go first, Athena.
A magic wand for me would just be for everyone to know that many kids have a feeding disorder, and like early intervention, like if we can get this into early intervention and just have everyone just know that that's a thing, that would be great. Because I mean, it's a journey regardless of whether you have it or not, but just knowing at the start that this is an option. Because when you go into the pediatrician, do they screen for feeding? No, that's not a question. They're not like, hey, how is your kid eating or feeding? No one asks that. And isn't that like basic needs, like in the hierarchy of needs, like nutrition is like a basic need, but no one's asking. Like I had to fill out like the autism screening you have to fill out. I was like, I'm not worried about autism right now. I used to be a teacher. As like neurodivergence is like the key to our future on our planet. I'm worried about my kid isn't eating. Like you're not asking those questions, you know? So if I could, something like that would be what I would do with my magic wand.
Love it. What about you, Jaclyn?
I love your answer, Athena, because I do think that that's the key. You know, at Feeding Matters, early intervention and early identification is something that we try to talk about so frequently, because even like Athena, when you shared earlier about Ari and some of the stuff he's facing now around anxiety, around meal times and food, it's the earlier we can identify that, ideally that lessens that psychosocial impact. And so mine is also a little bit of an early identification, but something at Feeding Matters that we're working on is making sure that people even know about this. I think so many people think it's picky eating. And so I think that, at least we talk about this on the team sometimes, that we hear that the term like, oh, it's picky eating, just kind of gets us a little bit upset sometimes, because it does hurt your heart, because you know that like that is a myth that's out there. That means we're missing some vital things from children. We're missing if there's something medically going on, like EOE, as to why they're not eating and why they're trying to communicate with their behavior that something is wrong. Or from a feeding skill standpoint, that we're missing it. So I think my magic wand, I guess, would be that the whole world would just know what PFD is right away, even before individuals are pregnant, so that we have a community that is more embracing of children that maybe feed differently, that there are children that feed by feeding tube, that there are children that can only eat a certain, chicken nugget on their plate because that's the space that they're in. And I think there's just a perpetual judgment around feeding, no matter what it looks like. And so I would hope that that awareness opens the door for inclusivity.
I think you're both absolutely doing that, especially now just on this podcast and doing what you're doing to spread awareness. And I find it so like with these magic wand questions, the answers are always like not rocket science, right? It's not this like define that. No, it is awareness, advocacy, and action. And how can we, instead of being scared of it, empower parents at the beginning to have an awareness so that they feel confident to talk about it with their provider. And we know that providers are different from place to place, even from across the street. You can have two pediatricians' offices who give you two different ideas. And that's why support and patient advocacy organizations like yours are just doing such important work. And I'm so grateful. What do you want parents who are listening to this podcast and may either have a child who feeds differently or struggles with EOE or any kind of pediatric feeding disorder, what do you want them to know, and what are some steps you want them to take to get support?
I think the number one thing I always want families to know is that they're not alone in this. I think so often we're comparing ourselves to what other children are doing, or if we feel like our pediatrician maybe dismissed our concerns around feeding, then how can anyone else in our life understand what's going on? And so I think in that sense, families close their door and they try to figure it out and feed throughout the night or do whatever they can to make sure their child is gaining weight. And so I think, you're not alone in this, that, it may take a while to find the community, and hopefully listening to this, you're finding Feeding Matters resources, whether you have the courage to call us or can just look at our resources online or on social media. You're not alone.
Yeah, it breaks my heart thinking about that like lonely parent in the middle of the night, just desperate, because when you've been there, you know what that feels like, and it's a dark hole.
It's a dark hole. I was just thinking about how it's still hard for me, like to talk to my family about it. So like that is like I just like they still don't quite understand like what's going on. But even before I had like learned about this organization, I thought you only needed a tube to eat if you're deathly ill. Like I didn't think that was just like a way. Like you learn a lot about feeding and eating. People have like tube feeding picnics. Like one of our partners in Australia, like things like that, like normalize different ways to eat.
Yeah.
I used to peel grape skins for Ari, like peel them in my mouth and give him the grape. I used to this is of course because he couldn't chew, but I used to mash up my mouth and give it to him like a baby bird. And that's not, I would never go in public and do that. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Because I couldn't afford all the cool gadgets people have in their kitchens. I'm like, I have to pay for formula. I can't get this cool, whatever super masher people have. Like, what are my priorities here? So just a lot of that going on.
Yeah, I love that. And there's some things that people just may not know about, like the benefits of tube feeding to help you get through really difficult times and make sure your child's nourished. And
it's truly life-saving. And honestly, like we would hope that families that are considering that decision know that it can really take the weight off your shoulders sometimes of all the stress that you're already facing.
Right. And it makes sense that it's like so scary at the beginning. Trying to navigate that decision feels so big. But it's like that peer-to-peer network that you guys offer. Like those are the conversations that can really help you understand or get to a place or, even come up with questions to ask your care team the next time you're with them.
Well, I'm always a big proponent of just mental health. I just talk about how like we go to the dentist twice a year and like the other doctors once a year, but when do we go to our brain doctor? Like we don't go to a brain doctor, and like you just need a support. Like starting therapy for me, because I saw my anxiety just bleeding on to Ari. I was like, he's anxious because I'm super anxious, and like this is not going to help anyone. So just talking to like a counselor, therapist, professional is super important when you're going through these difficult, traumatic moments. It's really helpful. Just going to put a plug out there for mental health.
Yes. And it's so easy to, especially when your child has medical needs, to prioritize what they need over what you need. And then it's like, oh, wait, in order for them to get what they need, I have to have what I need. I cannot function without it.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I think that's a lesson we learn inexperience too.
Mm.
Like, I think I heard it so many times until you are in the middle of it and you're like, oh, that's what that is.
I think especially for our age group, I have a lot of hope for like Gen Z who's coming up. And
Mhm.
while they may in some ways be, different workers than we are, they're like thinking about, well, how is this going to affect me? Well,
Mhm.
and I like
Yeah.
that's amazing because we don't have that. We have to work through that. So like maybe our kids will see us doing the work and be like, oh, that's
Mhm.
just part of it.
Yeah, it's now
Mhm.
a language that's introduced to them very
Oh,
early
yeah.
on versus, learning a language later in life.
Yes.
Yeah. Ari's been 30 months old, and I'm going to continue it. Now we're in OT. I'm going to go into the psychosocial next for anxiety, just to keep ahead of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We have therapy on the same day, actually. So it's really sweet. I'm like, have fun
Oh,
in therapy. And then I go too.
yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
practicing what you preach.
Yep.
Well, Jaclyn, where can people get in touch with Feeding Matters and what's the best way for parents to find you all?
Yeah, there's two ways. So our website's one, feedingmatters.org. The other way, and I think this is really helpful because we all have to look at like what our social media feeds are, and sometimes they lift us up, and sometimes they don't provide that positivity in our lives. But hopefully, our social media does do that for you, and that's Feeding Matters. So any Instagram or Facebook is a good place to find us too, and see that you aren't alone in this. This past May, we shared a bunch of different stories of various different PFD because it looks different on every
Mhm.
single child and family.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here with us today. And I'm so excited to be able to share all of your resources. So thank you so much.
Thank you for
Thank
having us.
you. Thanks, Katie.